full screen? Full screen, please. Okay, great. All right. Good morning, AP Computer Science A. This is Monday, April 6th. It's 10:40 a.m. Hopefully you all had a fantastic weekend. One thing I just want to make sure I remind you of is to fill out that attendance form on Google Classroom. We've located where that is now, so that should be fine. I did not give you homework at the end of last class. I was going to, and then I decided, there he is. I was going to give you homework at the start of at the end of last class, but I decided with all the changes coming to the AP exam, we are going to shift away from multiple choice as of this point anyway, even though those were great problems to refresh our memory on everything that was going on. But we're going to shift away from multiple choice because we're really going to focus on the free response questions that are featured on the AP Computer Science A exam. Hopefully you had a chance to send out the very long, and I apologize for the length of it, but very long email that I sent out over the weekend. I think I sent it out Friday afternoon, containing all of the up-to-date information about the AP exam. I just want to make sure I go through that with you for 2020. I think this page, by the way, the one on the AP exam schedule, is literally the most helpful page on the whole web of pages that the College Board has about the AP Computer Science A exam updates, or just updates for any AP exam in general. I think this literally has everything that you need to know right on it. Keep in mind that for AP Computer Science A, our new exam date is May 15th. I think that's a week after it was supposed to be, so we get an extra week to study, which is nice. There are 2 free response questions on the exam. That's all it consists of, 2 free response. The first one, being 25 minutes long, counts for 65% of your grade, is on arrays and array lists. You should be able to write a program to satisfy method specifications using expressions, conditional statements, and iterative statements. That's a big fancy way of saying write a method that does a thing that I want you to do. And then write a program code to create, traverse, and manipulate elements in a 1D array or array list object. Essentially, they're asking you to know arrays and array lists inside and out. And I don't think that's what's the word I want to use? I don't think that's an unfair thing to demand for the AP exam. We've worked with arrays a lot. We've worked with array lists a lot. So in this first class that we have together after this information coming out, we are going to spend it entirely reviewing arrays and array lists. That's my plan of attack for today. All right. My plan of attack for Wednesday's class is to, because we only see each other twice this week, is to entirely review the material for question 2, which is on methods and control structures. It says we should be able to write program code to create objects of a class and call methods. What that pretty much means is it's almost like those free response questions that I've given you on summative assessments in the past, where I've created the shell of an object for you as well as what it's supposed to do. And your job is going to be to write code to fill in those methods. That's why I actually structured the summative assessments like that, so that it should be a pretty direct translation to the AP exam. And again, just like with question 1, you should be able to write a method that does a thing. All right. I'm guessing that you'll have to fill in the methods of objects. It's going to be like, oh, this method in the object should do X, Y, and Z, so make it do that. And then I'm guessing this second part will probably be like, all right, consider another client class that has access to this object. Can you write it so that it makes 3 objects, traverses them, and does a certain operation, or something like that, right? Just like we've seen before, where we create an object and then we create a client class to go along with it. I'm guessing that's what the second part is going to be. All right. Just keep in mind that an IDE or something like Dr. Java is not required. You can use it if you want on the side, but it's certainly not going to give you any sort of advantage. There is a makeup day on June 3rd as well, if for whatever reason the May 15th deadline causes an issue. But I'd personally rather get it over sooner rather than later, especially while the topics are still fresh. So we're going to be shooting for that May 15th, 4 p.m. deadline. All right. Does anybody have any questions as to the structure of the AP exam given this information and given the information that I emailed you over the weekend?
Is there still like any details on how we'll be accessing the test, or like how we'll be like uploading responses?
That's a good question. As far as specifically accessing, I don't have any details right now. What I was told is that you will be able to access it via any device that has an internet connection, so a smartphone, a laptop, a desktop. I don't know if that extends to like an Xbox. I wouldn't take your AP exam on an Xbox, but you know, who knows. But you should be able to access it on on a Wii U, maybe on a DS potentially. So you should be able to access it with any device that has internet access. They're probably going to send out, I imagine the College Board would send out a link to some specific portal that they use to ask all the questions and have it be a timed environment, but I don't have any specifics as to how that is yet. As to how you're going to submit your work, I know that your work is supposed to be done out on paper, and you are going to take pictures of your work and upload them as submissions. So I know that as well. The other thing is that even though your exam time is at 4 p.m., it is asked by the College Board that you do get to your scheduled time 30 minutes early, just to make sure that your technology is all set up and ready to go for when the exam time starts. Because I imagine right at that 4 p.m., it's going to be like, all right, AP exam starts now. And it's going to be like, all right, you have 25 minutes for question 1. Here's question 1. And you have to write your response. And then like 25 minutes later, it's going to disappear from the screen and you'll have to upload it. Like, that's how it's going to be. So just be very mindful of that. Any other questions about that? Feeling good? Happy? So again, just to clarify, there are no multiple choice questions on this year's AP exam, just 2 free response questions. All right. Now, what I'd like to show you today is, since the first question, the majority of the exam weight is on arrays and array lists, I would very much like to spend today's class reviewing the concept of array and array lists. I have some notes ready to go for you. I want to give you some notes on arrays and array lists. Some of this may be stuff that you already know. In fact, all of this should be stuff that you already know, but maybe it's stuff that you were a little rusty on in the past. So I want to make sure I clarify any misconceptions for you today on arrays and array lists. So let's take a quick look at what an array is, as well as what an array list is. And then from there, we'll go through a couple examples of what you can do with arrays and array lists, as well as give you some homework problems to try on your own. All right, so starting with arrays. Remember that an array, I'm going to make a little bulleted list here. An array is a data structure that represents a, a data structure of static size that is used to contain a list of information. Okay, that's really what an array is. It's a data structure of static size that's used to contain a list of information. You want to store a list of information, like a list of numbers, a list of names, a list of objects, a list of whatever you want. It's used in this array. Okay, an array does have static size, meaning that once you specify the size of an array at the very start, it has to be of that size. You cannot change the size of an array later on. Okay, so if you make an array that's size 5, it's size 5, and that's it. If you want to make it size 4, well, you have to make a new array and copy it over potentially. Okay, the structure of an array is marked with indices. So an array, the positions in an array are marked with indices. Okay, and the indices start at 0 and they go up to array.length minus 1. Remember, array.length is the way that you can say how many things are actually stored in this array. Remember that your indices in an array start with 0, so if you have 3 things in an array, they're going to be at index 0, index 1, and index 2. Array.length, though, will tell you that there are 3 things that will return the value of 3. 3 things stored in the array, so your indices go from 0 to array.length minus 1. Okay? One other thing about arrays is that the values stored in an array have to all be of a particular data type. Okay? So data type being ints, doubles, or object types as well. You cannot mix and match unless you use inheritance, which I showed you. You could actually make everything an array of the parent class. I assume, since inheritance is not going to be covered on the AP exam, that is outside of the scope of what we're talking about here. But do keep in mind that you do have to have all of the same things. You can't mix ints, doubles, strings, whatever. Okay? So the syntax to actually initialize an array. Suppose I wanted to create an array of integers called numbers. I would just say ints with open close bracket. I'd say numbers equals new ints, and say we want to have 5 numbers. I would say 5. Okay, just like that. If I know what numbers are going to be in the array right away, you could go ahead and actually just list them out here. So instead of saying that 5 is the size of the array, you can go ahead and say I want to make an array that contains the numbers 6, 7, 19, -4, and 0. Okay. And that will create an array with those numbers in that particular order. Okay? Or, again, to accomplish that same thing, you could go ahead and just do int numbers equals new int 5. And then you can go ahead and separately list them out if you really wanted to say numbers at index 0 should equal 6, and numbers at index 1 should equal 7, and so on. Right? So you could keep that pattern up if you wanted to do it one of two ways. If you don't know what numbers are going to be provided, but you want to get user input or maybe input from some other method, typically the AP exam doesn't like the scanner object, but a lot of times it'll say this method gives some number that should be used as input, right? We actually saw that on the midterm with the snail race thing, the thunder snail from Undertale, right? We saw that the crawl distance method actually returned just however far it moved. You just accepted that this method returns how far it moves. So you could say something like that, like numbers at index 2 equals, and then you could just say input.nextInt, or whatever method would be used to actually obtain the next information. Does that make sense to everybody, how that's done? Okay. Again, remember to traverse a list, to go through a list. So to traverse, meaning to go through an array, you want to use a loop because you want to access all of the elements. You could say for int I is 0, I is less than array.length, I++, and you could now say, it's called it's called numbers, not array. Called numbers. And you could now say numbers at index I to access whatever position that you want to access. Whether you want to print that value, which you can certainly do, just like that. Whether you want to pass it into a method, which you can certainly do. So you can say like you have a method and you pass that value in, or whatever you want to do with this particular thing. You could pass it into an if statement, if numbers at index I, something, something, something. But that's how you access those particular values. Does that make sense? Keep in mind that you can modify the traversal of this by changing I++. What this does, this starts at index 0 and goes to the end of the list. If you wanted to go in reverse, you could start by saying this, right? And then I minus minus, and go until I is greater than or equal to 0. Right? Nothing wrong with that. Where you would just now go backwards through the list instead of forwards, but forwards would be the way that we had before. Okay. Go backwards. You could go like you could only look at even indices if you really wanted to. You could say like I plus equals 2. You could start at 0, go up to numbers dot length minus 1 if you really wanted to, and that would only look at even indices of your particular array. There's a lot of things you could do. You may have to watch out with this to make sure it doesn't bounce out of bounds, but there's a lot of things that you can do with this just to traverse arrays in all different ways. Okay. Keep in mind that another really important thing with arrays is being able to swap elements in an array. I'm almost certain that's going to be something on the AP exam. I mean, even though the topics are limited, swapping is something that's really emphasized in any sort of textbook or any preparatory materials. So just to show you again, suppose that I wanted to swap. So suppose we wanted to swap indices 2 and 3. Okay, the values stored at those, so I should say the values. The values stored at indices 2 and index 3, right? Say index 2 and 3, just to make it on one line. In order to do that, we can't just do this, because it seems like you should be able to say numbers at index 2 equals numbers at index 3, right? And numbers at index 3 equals numbers at index 2. And that seems like it would be all well and good, right? If I did numbers at index 2 equals numbers at index 3 and just flip-flop, seems like, well, wouldn't that swap them? But definitely not. When you do this, the original value that was stored at numbers at index 2 gets lost because you replace it with what was at numbers at index 3. So this would really just now become a copy of itself, right? Your original value would get lost entirely. What you want to do first is you need to create some sort of temporary variable to store that. okay, so that that value doesn't get lost. You can then replace it with what's stored at numbers at index 3, and then say that temporary is now stored here. Okay, that preserves the value of that variable. Cool. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have a question on arrays? I know that was like a super crash course of arrays, and I am going to ask you to do more with arrays on your homework assignment for next class, but does anybody have any questions about that? We're all good? Makes sense? Good. So, array lists, very, very similar to arrays. Array lists are really just the object version of arrays. You can certainly make array lists with, you can certainly make arrays of objects, but array lists are really designed more to handle objects and dynamic things. So an array list is a data structure. I'm going to very much copy the definition up here, but it's a data structure now not of static size, it is a data structure of dynamic size, meaning that that size can change. That is used to store objects, and in fact can only be used to store objects. Okay, it's a data structure of dynamic size, meaning that the size changes. You never define the size of an array list. It just starts empty at size 0, and you just add to it as you go through. Okay? Something to keep in mind is just like with regular arrays, the positions in an array list are marked with indices. So the positions in an array list are marked with indices. And again, just like before, it's from 0 up until ArrayList dot size minus 1. Keep in mind that instead of dot length, ArrayList uses dot size, and ArrayList the dot size is a method of the ArrayList class, so we need to make sure you use those open close parentheses as well. Okay, and unlike an array list is a lot more flexible with what you can do, and its behavior is very, very important. So just like a thing, by the way, this is also true, just like an array. The values stored in an array list have to all be of a particular type as well. Okay, but there is no primitive data allowed with array lists, so keep that in mind. Jeepers. No primitive data allowed. All right, so keep that in mind. We cannot use just ints, doubles, booleans, etc. with an array list. Okay, so what can you do with an array list? Well, the syntax to initialize it originally, you'd have to say array list, and then you put your object type in the middle. So say we want to do an array list of just integers, or let's do strings. Say we want to do an array list of strings. Did integers in the last one. We'd say array list string. We could have words. Just call it words equals new array list string. And then we do an open close parenthesis just to initialize it. What this does, this creates an array list of strings called words. Notice it doesn't start with anything in it yet, right? We're gonna add to it and modify it as we go through. So if you want to add to the list, you can either type, you could type this. You could say words.add, and we could say a new word called hi. Okay? What that would do is that would add hi to the list. So adds hi to the list. Yes? That would now be stored at index 0. Suppose that you now wanted to add another word in front of that. Well, what you could do is you could say, actually I'll give myself a little more space, you could say words.add. You want to add, say, hello, and you want to now add that at index 0. And just to double check, it is what you want to add and then the index, right? It's not the other way around. I just want to make sure. I always get that mixed up in my mind, but I'm pretty sure it's typed this way. Can someone confirm that for me? But in any case, what this would do is this would add hello to index 0 and shift all other elements down by 1 index. Okay, is this syntax correct? Just double checking. I think I put the string and then the index, and not. I don't do this. I don't think I do that.
I think it's, yeah. I think you put the index first.
Index first? All right,
If
so
I'm
be it.
reading it. Yeah.
So be it. Index first. So we want to add at index 0, we add hello. Thanks, Mr. Ferrer. I appreciate that.
Yep.
So at index 0, I was wrong, we add hello. But that's the idea.
Yep,
If you
index
see an
element.
index specified in here, then we just add those contents. Okay? That means we're going to shift all the other elements down by 1 index. So now this word of hi would not be at index 0 anymore. It now gets moved to index 1. Can you picture that in your head, hopefully? Suppose let's just go ahead and add another word. All right, let me make this a little more legible here. Maybe do some bullets. That would probably look a little nicer. Okay. Let's say we now do words dot add, and then we say howdy. Okay. Since we didn't specify any index, it's just going to stick it at the end of the list. So this would now add howdy to index 2. Okay, because that's just the end of the list now. Yes. You could go ahead and type this, and that would not cause an issue because it would just say, oh, well, index 2 is the one that comes next, so we're just going to throw howdy right over there. All right, so that, keep in mind, does not cause an out of bounds. Even though it's redundant, you could just certainly just say that, but it's the same idea. Okay? Now, a couple other things that you can do with an array list. If you want to remove from the list, right, what you can do is you can use dot remove. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's important that you understand how it works. So you could say words dot remove at index 1. And what that would do is that would remove the thing that's stored at index 1. Whatever value is stored at index 1 or whatever object is there, it wants to kick that object out. All right. So in this particular case, when I had my hi at the very start, we then put hello above it. So this got bumped down to index 1, and howdy is now at index 2. Index 1 now contains hi. So what happens is this removes hi from index 1. And everything now shifts back to fill in what was removed. And that's a really important thing about array lists. So we can say howdy shifts back to index 1 now from index 2. And everything else beyond that, if there were more stuff beyond that, would also shift backwards 1 position. So that's a really important thing to recognize, that when you have an array list and you say dot remove, it kicks that thing out and then fills in the space by shifting everything over to fill it right in. Does that make sense to everybody? Good. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is to change a value in the list. You just say words.set. So for example, if I wanted to say words.set at index 0, I guess the index comes first. So at index 0, we're going to say we want to set that first thing to not say hello anymore. We now want to say what's up. Okay. So that would work as well. We just go ahead and change. That would just change this to this. Okay. No problems there. And then lastly, to access the data in the list, the important thing is, unlike an array where you use those open-close brackets to actually access the specific coordinates, we just say words.get at index 0 or index whatever. Using words.get at index 0 would now get this information. If I did words.get at index 1, notice that it would get this information now, right? But we just use words.get and whatever the index is in order to access the specific data. Okay. Other than that, other than those syntax differences and the differences in shifting, the functionality of an array list is very similar to an array. It's just the big difference is that an array list has dynamic size, meaning that it's going to continue to change how big it is and how small it is, and you can insert elements in between. An array is just like, okay, we got 5 things. That's it. There's 5 blocks. How do you want to use those 5 blocks? That's up to you. But we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions, or really 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions. But nothing's going to be able to change the fact that we have 5 spots. Okay? The last note I want to make about array lists is, remember that a lot of times we use array lists with what are called wrapper classes. Okay? And wrapper classes are like your integer, double, boolean, etc. What these really do is they just encapsulate those primitive data in like a big object framework so that you can use them with things that objects are designed for, like array lists. Now, you should definitely look up the documentation on integer, double, and boolean because there is a lot of stuff that these objects can do. But remember to actually just get the values from these, and this is what you'll need to know for the AP exam. You have to use the .get int value, .get double value, and .get boolean value method. Okay? So for example, suppose I had this. We just have an array list of type integer. We'll call it number equals new array list integer. And then say I do number dot add, and we add a new integer object with the value of, say, I don't know, 41, just pick a random number. And I want to now access that number and print it out. What you should say is you should say system.out.println. You should say, I think that was my Google thing just went off. You should say system.out.println. Where are my numbers? .get index 0, and then .get int value. Okay? Because what that actually does is that takes this object and unwraps it to actually return to you just the primitive integer of 41 in this particular case. Okay? So just make sure that you are mindful of the fact that you need to use .get int value, .get double value if it's a double, .get boolean variable if it's a boolean. Okay? Any questions or comments or concerns about anything that we've talked about today? I know that was just a quick crash course on arrays and array lists. I will share this document with you, but hopefully that's helpful. Yes, helpful? Hopefully?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Everybody's like, yes, helpful. Fantastic. All right. So, where are we here? I want to show you. So this is going to be the homework assignment that I'm going to send to you. I am going to ask that this is please completed by the start of next class because I didn't give you any homework over the weekend, so hopefully a nice little compromise. What you're going to be asked to do is to write methods to accomplish these tasks. So given an array of integer values, you should be able to return the minimum value stored in the array. So here's your method shell, and you should be able to, given this array of numbers, return the smallest. Okay? I wanted to do this because I wanted to introduce, number one, I wanted you to practice your skills and abilities, but number two, I wanted to really expose you to this syntax that is what you're going to see on the AP exam. The AP exam uses this notation where they say precondition and postcondition. Precondition is before this method is executed or even invoked at all, what is true? What can you assume is true about your program before you even get started? So in this particular case, your precondition would be that numbers, the list, contains int values and has length of greater than 0. So it's not an empty array. It doesn't have any errors in it. That would be a precondition. Your postcondition is that this method should return the minimum value stored in numbers. So the reason I want to type that out for you is because that's exactly what you're going to see on the AP exam. So just keep that in mind. Okay? Second question is, given an array of double values, you should be able to write a method that finds the arithmetic mean, or in other words, the average of all values stored in the array. Again, your precondition is numbers contain double values and has length greater than 0. Your postcondition returns the average of all numbers in the array. So you should be able to write code that does that. Number 3, given an array of strings as well as a specific string to search for, it returns the index in the array at which a string matching the other provided parameter is located, or returns -1 if no match is found in the array. So your precondition in this particular case would be that each index contains a unique string, that words has length greater than 0. This one's very important, by the way, the fact that you don't have duplicates, so you wouldn't have to worry about finding multiple instances of the same value. S is initialized with strings, and length has greater than 0. So the value that you're looking for is not an empty string. And then your postcondition is return the index of a string equal to S in the array, and returns -1 if not found. So you should be able to do that. I have to change the title of that. I just noticed it's not calculate average in double numbers anymore. Noticing mistakes on live stream. Jeepers. All right, and number 4, I know we're just about out of time, but number 4 says, now your array lists 4 and 5. Given an array list of integer objects sorted in increasing order, meaning from least to greatest, as well as an additional integer object. It inserts the integer object into the correct position in the array list while maintaining the sorted order. And remember I said use .getIntValue. So your method should be able to, it's a void method, it's not returning anything, but it should be able to take a list that has these sorted numbers and given this other number, insert it into the correct spot on the list. Your precondition that lists an array list containing integer objects whose values are sorted in increasing order. Your post condition is your insert values into the correct position. You insert this value in the correct spot. Okay, so here's your list. Here's your value. I should probably have a name for that. I'll make sure I type that up. And lastly, number 5, it creates and returns an array list containing n elements, each of which is an integer object with a random value from 1 to 100 inclusive. So a little bit more practice with math.random and how that works. Again, your precondition is that n is an integer greater than 0, so you don't have to worry about negative elements or anything like that. And your post condition is it returns an array list containing n random integers. Okay. So I am going to ask that you have this done by the start of next class. Sorry, I went just a little bit over today. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out. You can make a copy of this document if you want, so you can type right on here, or you can just do it on a separate piece of paper. But please, please, please get that done for next class, all right? I do want to answer any questions, comments, or concerns that you have at the start of next class on this. Next class, by the way, I am going to talk about objects and stuff like that, so you can go ahead and really the topics on the next part of the AP exam. So you could get a little preview of that on your own if you so desire, but that's really going to be the focus of my next class, sort of, again, giving you this crash course. Okay. Any other additional lingering questions, comments, or concerns? Guys, thank you for your attention and focus today, and thank you again for sticking around just a couple minutes after our scheduled time. I appreciate it. All right. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you on Wednesday, hopefully with 5 methods completed. Yes? That would be great. Thank you.